So it's not very interesting for us to just be able to create and drop databases. We also want to interact within a given database. That's where the tool psql comes into play. So the next thing we'll learn is how to interact with Postgres databases using psql. So your Postgres installation already comes with an interactive terminal app called psql. The way that we initialize psql is using an existing database that we created with createdb. We type in psql and then pass in that name of that existing database in order to begin a connected session with that database. So in our terminal, let's go ahead and create a database that we want to interact with at first. Let's just call that example. In order to connect to that database with psql, we type in psql example. From here, we should see the name of our database equal to #, and then it's waiting then for you to start interacting with that database here. So psql allows you to do two different things. One is you can directly type and execute SQL commands to your database. The second is that there are a number of meta commands that psql offers that allows you to inspect and preview your database and database tables. So let's go ahead and check that out. With \l, we can get a list of databases as well as who owns them and a number of other important properties about that database throughout our entire Postgres server. So we have 4 databases that exist on the Postgres server on this particular local machine, including the one that we just created. If you want to quit out of psql, you type in \q in order to quit out of that and return back to your terminal. If we create another database here with example 2, we can wound up connecting to the first example, type /l, and now see example 2 as another database that we have spun up and that exists within our server. There's nothing that exists within our example database right now, so let's go ahead and create a table. The way that we would do that in SQL is with create table, which you can type in all caps lock or all lowercase, and then pass in the name of your table. Let's just call it table 1. We'll give that in parentheses a column, say ID, of type integer as the primary key of this table. And let's go ahead and give that a description column that in Postgres is of type varchar, which means a string field of variable length. And let's say that it should not be null. We want to end that and say that's the end of the number of columns in our table. And in psql, as well as SQL in general, it will know that you have ended your series of SQL commands when you type in a semicolon. So let's go ahead and enter. From here, it shows that we've successfully created a table by echoing back create table to us. From here, we may want to make sure and preview that we actually do have this table within our database. The way that we do that is with a psql meta command called \dt, which you can remember as database tables. And it shows indeed that there's table 1 that we've created now. What if we want to see the table schema for table 1? The way that we do that is with \d, and we pass in the table name, table 1. From here, we see the list of columns that we just created. Their data types, integer and character varying, which we typed up here. And then we also have a number of other fields that deal with the constraints or default values that we may have described this table with. We had described the column description as having a constraint not null, so that's where we see the not null constraint being applied to the description here. You may also notice that there's a not null description that's applied to ID. That's because, as we should know from SQL, what primary key does is that it adds 2 constraints, a not null constraint as well as a uniqueness constraint, to make sure that the unique identifier always exists on a row and that it's unique per row within a table. Awesome. Let's say that we did not mean to connect to this particular database, but we wanted to connect to, say, example 2 instead. Well, you don't need to exit out of your psql session and reconnect with psql example 2. There's a meta command called \c, which allows you to conveniently connect to a different database. And then from there, you can check out the database tables in example 2 instead. It'll show that you didn't find any. You may have noticed that instead of saying list of tables, or you did not find any tables, it says list of relations instead, or didn't find any relations. Relations is sort of an old keyword that means the same thing as table. Most people just call things tables nowadays. So let's review that \l allows us to list all of our database tables. \c, and then passing in the name of a database, allows us to connect to a different database. \dt allows us to show all the tables within that database. And the \d, passing in the table name, allows us to see the table schema within a given table. And then finally, \q allows us to quit out of the session altogether and come back to your terminal.